Gabe Cook with Debate Kansas City, coming to talk to you about our newest file release, the spending disadvantage. And this disadvantage is one that you find on almost every debate topic, because most topics require affirmative teams to spend money on some type of program, and it's pretty easy and sometimes pretty effective to argue that spending money is a bad idea. As always, the first thing that you should do when you get this file is go through the index, check it out. Alright, it's going to have several different parts. It's going to have some beginning sections with a file guide, then it's going to have two different shells, and this is something to keep in mind. We have two versions of the spending disadvantage. I'm going to briefly explain both. One version we call the basic version, and it's just very simple, direct, to the point, especially good for first-time debaters. Then we have a more advanced version. It's a very complicated and specific explanation of the argument. You check on out through the file, and there's going to be a link section, some internal links, some impacts, and then at the very bottom of the file we'll have what we call the answer to section. And that's evidence that an affirmative team could use to answer the disadvantage if somebody ran it against them. Okay, so we've got a disadvantage file, it's got an index, and it has evidence within it that affirmative teams could use to counter or to argue against the disadvantage. As I mentioned, there's a file guide, and it's going to cover a lot of what I talk about here today. If you have any questions, I would consult the file guide because it can help you out. And we're also having this year a place for what we call an overview. And in this space here, what you can do is write out an overview, which is an explanation of the disadvantage. You're probably going to read the disadvantage in the first negative constructive. Okay, the affirmative stands up and reads their case. You read the spending disadvantage in the first negative constructive, and then either in the second negative constructive or the first negative rebuttal, whoever is extending, developing, further explaining this disadvantage, either the second negative or the first negative in the negative block, they can give what's called an overview. And before you really go and look at the different arguments the affirmative made against the disadvantage, you sort of tell a story that lets the judge know all the details of the disadvantage. And so I would recommend to you getting to know this argument, looking at the file, and then writing out your own overview that you can use every debate round, something you get comfortable with and something that really helps the judge understand the argument. So let's get down to it. It's the spending disadvantage. What does that mean? What is the argument about? Well, let's start with the basic version of the argument. The basic version says that right now the U.S. economy is about ready to get out of recession. We have hit the worst of this really long period of a bad economy. And that in order to get out of the recession, we had to spend a whole bunch of money. Do you remember all those bailouts for car companies and stimulus bills? And we spent all kinds of money, and now we have a huge debt. Okay? But we're going to be focused on reducing that debt. We went through this bad economy, we spent all our money. Okay, now we need to step back and look at ways to reduce the debt. So along is going to come the affirmative, and here's the link argument. They're going to start spending money on a poverty program. That poverty program is going to cost all kinds of money. Just when we need to be avoiding all this debt spending, along comes the affirmative, and they're going to spend billions of dollars. And that's going to hurt our economy. Finally, you have the impact. The impact is just some very general evidence that says, you know what, you need a strong economy for national security. You need a strong economy to help protect the environment. You need a strong economy in order to have money with foreign aid to help other countries out there. It just gives all kinds of reasons why it's a good idea to have a strong economy. And what you can do is you can weigh that against the affirmative case. You can say, you know what, they say they're going to help. They're going to do these poverty programs. Well, we say they're going to overburden the national debt just at a time when we need to be reducing it. That's going to hurt our economy. And when we have a bad economy, it makes it more difficult to do everything. So they might try and help poverty out a little bit, but they're going to make a lot of other things much worse. That's the simple explanation. Now we go to the advanced version, the more complicated explanation. And it goes something like this. The United States has a massive debt. That debt totals $11 billion. And before I go on, let me explain something right quick. Each year, the government has a budget. They have to set it. They have to try to live by it. If in a given year, they spend more money than they take in, that's called a deficit. So if in a given year, the federal government spends more money than it takes in from tax dollars, they have a deficit. If you have deficits year after year after year, you have a total. And that total is the national debt. Okay, so the national debt is the combination of all of these deficits. What's our current national debt? It would be about $11 trillion. So right now, the government is $11 trillion in the hole. Now here's the way this works. When you have debt, the government can go out and they can basically sell this debt to creditors. Sort of think of it like a credit card, all right? Only we have an $11 trillion bill. Now we have a lot of different credit cards. We get some of our money, in fact, a huge chunk of it, from China. So what China will do is they'll come to our Treasury Department and they will literally buy our debt. And when they buy our debt, they charge us interest on it. Just like if I bought a house, okay? I am basically buying it from the bank, and the bank is charging me interest money each month since I got the loan. Okay, so we have an $11 trillion debt. A whole bunch of it is financed through China. Here's the cool thing though. We have a really high credit score. They actually have these. They have international credit scores, and right now we're AAA. We're the best. That means that our interest payments on the debt are low, because other countries around the world think that we have it together. Yeah, they've got a big debt, but this United States, they're a pretty stable country. I'm sure they'll turn it around. But they're starting to get a little bit nervous. $11 trillion is a whole lot of money. And some of these countries might worry that we can't pay it back. If that happens, then they will increase the interest rates on our debt. So our debt suddenly becomes more expensive as we try to pay it off. That's only going to lead to more debt, which is going to lead to a very vicious cycle. How does the affirmative place come into play here? How does the deficit line up? How does this all go together? Well, I'm going to run back through the disadvantage now that I've given you the background. The disadvantage starts out by arguing that we've got this massive debt, like I explained, but that we have this great credit score, and that keeps payments on the debt low. Here's the problem. The affirmative comes along, and they start what we call an entitlement program. You see, poverty programs typically go to people that meet a certain criteria. And that means spending on that program is considered an entitlement. If you meet the criteria, you're entitled to the money. So when you have a poverty program, you create an entitlement. And that means that that money has to be spent every year. And typically, entitlement programs get bigger and bigger and bigger and more expensive. In fact, two of our biggest entitlement programs are Medicare and Social Security. And costs for those entitlement programs have gone up and up and up. The affirmative team is going to suck us into another entitlement program just at the point in time where we have a really big debt. What's going to happen then? Well, we have this new entitlement spending. It's going to bust our budget. It's going to mean a huge yearly deficit, which will then increase the national debt, like I explained. Once the debt goes up, we have all kinds of problems. These countries around the world that have loaned us money, like China, well, they're going to increase interest rates. That means interest rates back in America are going to go up, so it's harder to buy a car, harder to buy a house. It's also going to lead to inflation. Inflation means that the cost of everything increases and could lead to another economic catastrophe. All right, even worse than the recession that we've been in. A massive debt crisis is what this disadvantage argues. And the final impact is the same as it is for the basic version of the disadvantage, which is that when you have a bad economy, it makes it more difficult to fight all kinds of problems all over the world and problems here in the United States. This is a tricky argument. You may want to watch this video again, I don't know. You may want to email me and ask me questions. If that's the case, feel free. But if you study this file, you can be very, very effective. And one key thing, update. The economy constantly changes. That means that you need to be doing research all the time, especially about the state of the American economy. If you don't stay up to date on the disadvantage and you don't get to know it thoroughly, you're not going to be able to execute it. Good luck and take care.